Hey everyone, welcome to episode number 74 of the Live Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates, and I have numerous guests that I have been wanting to get on for a very long time. There are some that scheduling still has never worked. We're talking months, sometimes even years. And so Jason Brown, my pal, we finally made it work. He's a busy dude. So we have got him on air today. So it's a real pleasure to have you. A little bit about Jason for those of you who may not be super familiar. He's kind of the same generation of T Nation writers that I am. Guys like you, me, Gareth Sapstead, and Matthew Ibrahim all kind of took over, I suppose, from the old school people that we had been following for years. You know, your Tony Jellicore's and your that big long list of people like Ben Bruno. Sure. But a little more about you. You are an educator, public speaker. You mentor other fitness professionals. Not only have you written for T Nation, you've written for Elite FTS and more. You've authored a book now, Lower Body Training Through Human Kinetics, which is, I know, one of the things that was really keeping you busy. And you're a former CrossFit box gym owner, and you're a big devotee of the Conjugate method, which is where I want to go first. But it's great to have you on.
Thanks for having me, man. Yeah, like you said, it's always a challenge to make time for. I mean, we're all busy, right? Doesn't matter whether or not you've got kids or you've got one thing or another. We're all busy, so it's always tricky to make time. But I'm happy to connect with you. I know we've gone back and forth over the years. I always appreciate your voice notes you send me, and happy to be here, man.
It's almost perfect timing too, because the strength training world just recently is in mourning over the passing of Louie Simmons. Right, he's a legend in our space, and quite funny enough, I suppose, because I've never really grew up around powerlifting and all of it, Louie's reach for my work has been fairly limited. But I know he was a mentor. You spent considerable time at his gym. Mm-hmm. I wanted to sort of hear what you had to say about. I want to point out too, you're a certified special strength coach with Westside Barbell, right? Like that's one of the things that you've done, and we can talk a little bit more about that, what that means.
Sure.
But can you share his influence and legacy on strength training as a whole, not just for the hardcore powerlifting world, but the fitness industry as a whole? And then we can pivot into how the Conjugate method, how it works, and because he popularized it and you use it a lot in your training.
I do, yes. Yeah, so my initial exposure to the Conjugate method was back in 2004. The facility I trained at as a young athlete was using this system with all its athletes almost exclusively. So I had the ability to train at this facility. I worked under great coaches. I had the advantage of being an intern there and being able to ask questions. And that was kind of like my formal education early on. And, at the time, it's funny, if you think back to like the early T Nation days, there was like a daily article. And some of the people you mentioned, like Chad Waterbury, Eric Cressy, Louie Simmons, Dave Tate, I would read the daily article. So that was like before I actually did any formal, like real formal, as far as like, in the university setting. I was getting a lot of my information from, and a lot of the practical stuff was coming just being in the trenches and doing it myself and seeing the changes in my own body. So that was my early exposure to Louie Simmons. And I remember seeing, like the VHS tapes my strength coach had of, all of, Louie put out this incredible VHS tape line, which is kind of funny. Now I don't even think I have a VHS player, but it was like Louie on the cover with like his pit bulls and a barbell. And that was like my first kind of glimpse at Louie Simmons. And, the system for me kind of just spoke, volumes. Everyone was getting insanely strong. We were seeing it carry over to, I played football in high school and in college, and we were just seeing kind of the fruits of our labor play out on the field. So to me, it was kind of a no-brainer. This stuff works. And, I along the way experimented with various types of training. I mean, when I was in college, we were doing, bigger, faster, stronger. And every time I went back, as the semester ended or, during summer break, I was back at the facility that I was an intern at, back doing the Conjugate method. And I would always come back stronger and better. And a lot of people were like, well, what are you doing for training? And, why are you setting, I had in my position, I had all of my records on my team as a running back, for bench press, squat, power clean. And again, it was really a testament to the system itself. So that was like kind of my initial exposure to the conjugate way of training. And, for me, I'm very type A. So if I do something and I get a result, it starts kind of piquing my interest. But I really didn't go down the rabbit hole until later on, after I actually got out of college, went into the military, got exposed to CrossFit. That's how I got exposed to CrossFit, was through the military. And that kind of really kind of opened up the door for me as far as energy systems and understanding conditioning, because we didn't really get a whole lot into conditioning. It was more or less specificity to the sport we were playing. So there wasn't any aerobic development, or there was nothing, that would potentially take us outside of what we were doing in the sport we were playing. So there was definitely an area of low hanging fruit for me. I didn't know it at the time, but I would later realize that just kind of a big area of weakness for me, it's both an athlete as well as a coach, was just my knowledge of the aerobic system. So needless to say, the two worlds of like CrossFit and Conjugate kind of came together. And when we opened our gym, myself and my wife at the time, she was not my wife, but we opened our gym, and I was like, let's open a CrossFit gym. It's a good name. People know what CrossFit is, and people are interested in it, but let's do it different. Let's have a set schedule. Let's apply a lot of what I know from the strength and conditioning side of things, and let's get people really, really fit, but let's not burn them out, and let's not, put them into doing workouts that they really shouldn't be doing. So that was kind of what our facility was. And that really kind of piqued the interest of a lot of other gym owners wanting to know what we were doing. So that combination was just a great combination of both strength development, building GPP, but also building work capacity and building recovery through the aerobic measures. So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I'm not sure how far you want me to go down this journey, but that's really kind of like the early, how things transitioned for me, going from Conjugate, CrossFit, getting out of the military, realizing that there were benefits to having a good aerobic system, but also being strong is really kind of the base of our pyramid, what we build all of our fitness qualities upon. And then that kind of opened up the doors for a lot of other things for me.
And I neglected to mention, within there as well, you have a master's of, I think, exercise science, right? So
I do, yes.
Studied it just that much further to complement all this stuff. So let's actually, like, for me, like when I hear the Conjugate method for a really long time, I'm like, all right, I don't know what intuitively that means, because I had not studied it. And I share this because there are going to be a lot of people listening who, you sometimes hear these words or ideas or philosophies in our industry, and we can't possibly know it all. We certainly can't possibly know it all in grand depth. And if anyone is like me, you sometimes hear something and you're like, you feel kind of silly. You're like, I should know this. So you stay quiet. Mm-hmm. And I'm comfortable. Like I was at a seminar recently with the muscle doc, Jordan Shallow. And I remember he had said something fairly basic that he didn't really intuitively grasp, but he was very comfortable saying, listen, like, I don't fucking know what this means. And it just put me at ease. I'm like, because I feel pressure. Like, at this stage of my career, I should know all this stuff. I should know in and out a lot of the depths of strength and conditioning. And ultimately I didn't. So I actually did a refresher on Conjugate method, just so I was really like up on top of it before you and I sat down here. But could you explain to everybody, first of all, how the Conjugate method works and its practical applications for any coach who is working with maybe even general population clients?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I mean, at its base level, most people that think of the Conjugate method think of 2 max effort days, 2 dynamic effort days. So one day focusing on maximal loading, one day focusing on more bar velocity. But I think that that's like probably the most remedial definition of it. There's so much more to it. And this is where I think people associate Conjugate with just power lifters, about building the big 3, building their squat, bench, and deadlift. But there's so much more to the system that's applicable to general fitness, to people that just want to look good and feel good. And that's where I've seen the biggest carryover. So if I was to break it down, the Conjugate method is a mixed modality system of training that focuses on building strength through small exercises, your single joint exercise, your isolation work. And really kind of the crux of the system is work capacity. Well, how do you build work capacity? Well, you have to build work capacity. You have to start at the base level of, as Louie calls it, the base of the pyramid. A pyramid's only as big as its base. So you start with things like pulling the sled. So obviously anyone that knows Westside knows they pull a sled, but do they know why they pull a sled? The sled affords you the ability to build work capacity through building the aerobic system. If you build your aerobic system, you improve your ability to recover between sets. You improve your ability to recover between sessions. You improve how long you live. Okay, it's well established that aerobic fitness is correlated with how long someone lives. You improve your ability to do anaerobic work and restore ATP between sessions. So like an American football player is a good example. We know that most plays are 4 to 7 seconds in length, which is very anaerobic. It's very ATP PC system. However, there's only about 45 seconds of rest between plays. So how does someone recover if they only are anaerobically inclined? They don't recover well. And this is something I suffered from because my aerobic system was shit. So if you build your aerobic system, it has connections with anaerobic. It has connections with recovery. It has connections with how long you live. It can go down the list. I mean, it's really the only form of training that someone can say you'll live longer if you prioritize it, and there not be blown smoke. It's well established that there is a big connection there. So that, I think, is one of the things that a lot of people don't associate. You know, they look at power lifters and they're probably like, well, these guys aren't super healthy. But there's a lot of validity to building work capacity with like pulling a sled, doing high volume band work, doing loaded carries, and all the things that you and I associate. You know, we have our clients do that stuff, but we probably don't think like, well, are they really doing a lot of that at Conjugate? And I will tell, or at Westside, and I'll tell you that they're doing, 10 to 12 sessions a week. Now, they're not all big sessions. They're not all max effort or dynamic effort. There's only actually 4 main sessions, but there are all these small sessions that are not very intensive on the nervous system either, so you can recover fast from them. So that is really kind of one of the main benefits of that system, is structuring the training in a way that there's recovery between the most demanding sessions on the central nervous system, having smaller sessions or smaller modalities that allow you to build work capacity, and then building dysfunction. So you do that through smaller exercises that build smaller muscle groups that assist the bigger lifts. So if you want to build your back squat, people think, well, I'll just back squat more, but they usually don't look at more of a granular level at like, where is the weakness? Is it because I can't stabilize my core? Is it because I have weak hamstrings and glutes? Where is the limiting factor? And one of the things that, Louie has done is looked at, well, where is someone most limited in that lift? And that's what we need to build upon. And when you build these weaknesses, you build a lift, but you also build resiliency and your ability to stay healthy and not get injured. So that's kind of more of like an overarching view of it. But if someone just said, well, what is it? It's a system, a mixed modality system that prioritizes working both ends of the force velocity curve. So we work the velocity component with dynamic effort training. We work the force component with maximal effort training. And then all the really key pieces are the assistance and accessory exercises, and then the sled work. And I prescribe it in a variety of ways. It's not just sled work. We do a lot of different types of aerobic style work. But that's kind of like if I had to summarize it to someone and put it into a definition that's kind of more relatable, that's how I would put it.
So let's actually reframe it a little bit. So this will probably sound familiar to people. A couple other hallmarks of conjugate method are variation within the way that subtle variation changes to the big lifts. So that way it's not always the same. And the focus on the accessories that, you've said this, focus on the accessories that help fill in the gaps where someone's weak. So we have 4-day upper lower splits for the most part. We have a lot of emphasis on strength. We have a lot of us, like you said, we do things like Farber's carries and sled work with our clients, and we focus on recovery. So that all of a sudden starting to sound a lot more familiar to a lot of people who probably are doing much of this. Conjugate is just more systemized, and there's value in having a really good system, because if you're consistently applying a system, and that's really just what our programs do. So Conjugate is very proven in terms of its results. I mean, Westside is legendary for the strength athletes it produces. You've seen a lot of success with it personally with the clientele you work with. So if we go back to the coaches who are listening and thinking, all right, well, conjugate sounds just like this very complicated alien sort of thing. Chances are you're applying a lot of the core fundamentals of conjugate. It's just that conjugate itself has, it's not even like it's a rigid system, but it does have a system and a philosophy under which we operate. So
Right.
now that we've bridged that gap a little bit, is there any advice that you would give coaches to take more of the value out of conjugate? Even if someone doesn't say, okay, I'm all of a sudden now a conjugate method coach, what else can we bring to our training with our clients that conjugate philosophy that will make us better coaches?
Well, I think that one of the big pieces of that puzzle is understanding how the body responds to stress. And when Louie decided where he was going to put these sessions within a given week of training, that was a major consideration. And he always talks about, having enough time between your higher threshold sessions. Max effort training is very demanding on the nervous system. So you have a lot of people, and social media does a great job at showing people doing hard training every day. I have commented on I don't comment on a lot of people's stuff. I think one of the things, and actually it's probably a topic for a podcast that you should do, is that the negative stuff that people post, it's usually people that like have no credibility or no, I don't like saying anything negative to anyone. I want to be a positive person. But some, there are influencers out there that are prescribing high intensity workouts on a daily basis. And I've commented and said, hey, well, how many high intensity sessions do you recommend doing in a week? And someone will say like every day. Well, if you're doing it every day, then there's a problem, because at the end of the day, the body is not a gumball machine where you just put quarters in and get gumballs out. There's a point of diminishing returns. And that's how the body works. That's how the nervous system, when you have a baseline level of knowledge of what the nervous system, how it works in terms of, your CNS, your autonomic nervous system, your parasympathetic nervous system. I mean, these are things that we can maximize. So if we're constantly putting people into a fight or flight state, there's a problem, because people are already chronically stressed out. You and I do not work with someone that is not stressed out. It's inevitable. We're working with people that are stressed out. So if you stress them out daily, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when they are going to overtrain. So Louie had the knowledge to say, hey, we can do max effort training, but we can't do it every day. And I think that's one of the main things that I would impart on other coaches, is to say, think about how often you're stressing people out. Sometimes people need lower intensity training, as really, they could be their entire program. If you have someone that is in law enforcement, they're really stressed out, the resting heart rate's at 80, then, the best answer would likely be to find ways to bring them down, and to build, again, more low intensity measures to drive their stress levels down. So I think that if you can take one message, is having a structure, having a system, like you mentioned, of where you do certain things, and know that you're going to make your money on the low intensity, the small exercises. You'll hear Conjugate Louie say like it's 80-20. So the 80-20 rule is 20% is with bilateral movements and 80% is with single joint movements. Why does he spend so much time on single joint movements? Because they're low demand, there's a huge return on investment, and they're a lot easier to recover from. So, I mean, I think that would be kind of one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle, is making sure that you're just not constantly stressing out your clients.
And I've noticed in my own personal training, like for me, with the exercise I choose, as I get a little bit older, I'm finding that I shift more and more towards unilateral training, right? As opposed to just the beating of the big heavy barbell stuff.
Yeah.
My joints, especially my shoulder, doesn't like having a barbell across anymore for squatting. I love squatting. And I go look at getting a Duffalo bar, and then maybe that'll give me that back. But I've been doing a lot of Bulgarian split squats. Those agree with me a whole lot more. I've been absolutely loving single leg Romanian deadlifts. Absolutely loving how those feel. And, anything to do with shoulder stuff. Yeah, I'm still okay with some overhead barbell pressing, at least seated, right? The standing stuff just doesn't put me in a good angle, but I really like single arm stuff there. And I'm noticing that the things that are influencing me are also creeping into my programs with my clients. And we do that as coaches. I mean, we got to be careful not to go, oh, well, what's working for me is obviously what we need for our clients. Sure. But we also know this is a general principle that, it's good to have our clients doing a lot of unilateral stuff. So that's
without a doubt.
That's really cool to kind of get that understanding of Conjugate. I hope that's really helpful to anybody listening, especially if they're not super familiar with it. So let's extend this a little bit more into general strength and conditioning, because when I think of people in our industry who really are the go-to people on strength and conditioning, it's you, it's Joel Jameson, a very, very small cluster of other people. You guys really have your media and your products, your courses, your mentorships or whatever are built around this stuff. It often feels like hardcore training stuff for the powerlifting side, for the competitive athletes. Can you give some fundamentals of strength and conditioning, just further than what you've already done, that again would benefit every trainer, what every trainer should know, maybe resources they should be diving into? And let's talk about the stuff that you have, your coursework that trainers can benefit from.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate you saying that. It's definitely a process. I think that at the end of the day, all of the formal education I've done, if I had to put a percentage on it, it would be very low as far as what it gave me, what it provided me with in terms of overall knowledge. Most of my learning came by way of my own trial and error, practical, being in the trenches. I mean, again, at the end of the day, I can open a textbook right now and say, look at a session that they have in Essentials of Strength Training and Conditioning, and a lot of them aren't practical. Okay, textbook stuff, usually, generally speaking, not every textbook, but a lot of texts, it's not really practical to the real world. Doing 10 exercises for 5 sets of 10 is not practical. And if you're having your clients do that, then I don't know what to say about that, because that's brutal. And I think you should probably try that session on yourself first, because doing 50 reps for 10 exercises, that's miserable. But at the end of the day, I think that, one of the best things is, number one, you have to practice what you preach. And like you just said, you're having all of these kind of aha moments with your own training. The only thing that does, it does multiple things. It obviously empowers you to make better choices with your own personal programming, but that experience allows you to better connect with people you're working with that are probably experiencing the same thing. That's why I've really kind of niched down with who I work with now and working with more people like myself, because I think at the end of the day, and this is something you do really well, connecting with people, you're not going to learn that at any university setting. You're not going to go get a certification that's going to teach you that. You have to do it. So, there are so many people that are making the shift to online training. They haven't done in person. I mean, you and I can go back and forth on this, but I think that in person I think it's a prerequisite. I mean, would you agree with me?
I'm a big believer in that. And here's how you've been did this 17 years. And this is actually where we're going to go next. The balance between being savvy in the way that social media is today, without catching ourselves subscribing to gatekeeper philosophy. I think that the new model is really quite hybrid. And I think coaches are going to find their way into being involved in online more and more. Mm-hmm. I think you will always be a substantially better coach if you have significant experience working with people, seeing how they move in real time. It will allow you to then translate that into online, watching video, give people coaching cues, the experience of actually interacting with those people. I think they're essential for a great career. But the reality is we know that coaches are going to be getting into the industry and stepping into online sooner. So we have two choices. One, can we make those people better at all of it? Or can we turn around and say, from the loudest thing we have on our media, say, no, you need 5 years of in-person training before you've earned the right. That those people are going to tune that out. You all of a sudden now have lost the opportunity to be an educational influence to help them do it really well. So it's that balance of, and we'll come back to the whole gatekeeper idea, but I mean, fundamentally, I agree with you. It's like, you will be a much, much better coach if you have substantial in-person time. We actually have to face a reality now that coaches are finding their way online quicker.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly. I think that, it was definitely a tremendous benefit for me to have, I would say probably close to a decade. I went online 100% in 2016, which seems like forever ago now, but I went online organically, and that's another story in and of itself. But having the in-person experience, and then knowing that, seeing literally thousands upon thousands of hours of seeing people move was definitely a huge benefit. Now, if the world shuts down right now and gyms are closed, people have to make a living. Now, if they have no in-person experience, then I would agree. I still want to support those people and not be like, hey, well, you don't have the in-person experience, so screw you. That's the wrong answer to, and I think you hit the nail on the head with that. And that's kind of where I've gone with teaching people a system of writing programs. So they're not spending 4 hours writing a program for one person, because again, that's not going to be scalable for their time. But being able to write good programming quickly, that is going to be super important for them. So I forget where we were going with this now, but I think like the one thing I would impart on anyone, I wouldn't worry about a certification. A certification, is not going to make you more money. Okay. I could go get my PhD. Is it going to make me more money? No, I'm not. I'm probably, if I went to, and even getting higher levels of education was more for me than it was for my income. The biggest piece of the puzzle is just doing it and taking inventory on what works and what doesn't, and using yourself as a human guinea pig, which kind of sucks, because I want to, like anyone, like any of my clients, I want to just follow a program too and not have to think. But I've gotten to a point where I can do that now, but it's taken a long time, and I still find myself, putting myself in the trenches and testing some, split or different take on using the conjugate system. So I think that if you can just practice what you preach, be a human guinea pig, and just educate yourself, there's so many good resources out there. I mean, I even find myself sometimes I go through old T Nation articles, like Mike Robertson, it's got a bunch of great articles on T Nation on programming. And sometimes I find myself just like going through old stuff like Charles Poliquin or Mike Robertson or whoever, and reading some of that stuff and like gleaning new information from it, because my outlook now is different than it was 10 years ago.
I actually got to hang out with Mike again in Florida at Raise the Bar. So talking about like T Nation alumni shit, Dan John was there, Lee Boyce was there, Tony Gentilcore was there. I brought Luca into T Nation, so he was there. Mike Robertson was there, and I'm probably missing at least a few more, because that was quite the John Berardi was there. There you go,
Yeah.
right? So that was cool. What you said about the education, and I think this is important too. I mean, I think we talk about this a lot, not chasing education just for education's sake. And there was probably a time where I was like, almost like I didn't want to wave around the fact that I don't have a lot of what you would call formal education in fitness. My degree is actually a Bachelor of Commerce degree. I have an honors degree in business. And I never imagined finding myself in the fitness industry. I got started at 32 years of age. You got started quite young, but I found it later on with a lot of life experience. I think that in of itself has value. And it's certainly the industry that I'll probably never retire from. But I started with a very basic certification, right? I didn't go and get one of the more reputable ones when I started. And it's just been a general quest to learn. And I was reading T Nation from day one. Before even this, I'm reading muscle and fitness magazines. And if you're clever, you can tease out a lot of really valuable information out of that stuff. You got to have a good filter. But I've explored the resources that all of these great people that we've learned from and we know in our community, our peers now. And I'm always learning, and I'm reading everything I can get my hands on. And the technical training side, you also learn a lot of that stuff by doing while bouncing the articles and the certifications and like coursework or whatever. That stuff runs together. But then you got to fill in the gaps with things like, I'm going back through motivational interviewing, and I love books on coaching, because at the end of the day, you could have all the technical skills, but if you actually struggle to communicate effectively and create a really great experience with a person in front of you, it's not going to make a big difference. And that's a little bit more important when you're dealing with general population personal training clients. It still matters when it comes to athletic settings, but you've got people who are also like self-selecting to, okay, cool, I'm going to do whatever the fuck you say. And they're really driven. So that's something that I think coaches need to pay more attention to, as well as just simply the coaching quality of the interaction with the person in front of them. But I mean, I'm wandering off the original point too about strength and conditioning. So let's just see if we can fill in any of the gaps. Is there anything that you feel like is deficient with trainers coming up through now in terms of their knowledge base of general strength and conditioning fundamentals, do they tend to think of that as, oh, that's strength coach territory for, athletic populations, and they don't even kind of penetrate that? Is there a barrier for them?
I think probably one of the limiting factors for a lot of coaches is that they consider themselves to be like on one side of the spectrum. So I will say that Conjugate gave me one thing, and for any of the guys that are just strength conditioning purists, they hate CrossFit. CrossFit gave me another thing. Then it again put me down the rabbit hole of learning more about energy systems. And again, I was like, oh, I'm a strength coach. Well, you need to be a conditioning coach too. The two need to coexist. If you don't know how the two coexist, then you need to start learning how they coexist. Because again, 9 out of 10 people that you're going to work with, they need some form of conditioning. They need to downregulate the stress response. They need to improve things like the resting heart rate. That's how you are going to keep clients for the long term. It's not going to be through the strength work. It's going to be through bringing down stress levels, and so they can get more from the main sessions that you program for them. So don't consider yourself on one side. Like, I'm just a strength coach, or I'm just a CrossFit coach, or I'm just a rehab specialist. You'd have to be well-versed in a lot of different things. And I think that understanding how the two can coexist is really important. And I don't think you don't need a formal level of education to know that. You mentioned Joel Jamieson. Joel Jamieson opened my eyes up to aerobic training, using things like the cardiac output method and, different forms of aerobic conditioning and keeping the heart rate in the right range. Those are things that have huge return on investment. So those are things that you need to start understanding, because your clients probably aren't going to want to do it because it's not sexy. I post about it on social media. Those are always the worst posts. If you look at the insights for any of my aerobic posts, they're terrible. They get no reach. But I don't care, because I know that there's 3 or 4 coaches that might see it that say, hey, I'm not using any of this in my programming. Maybe I should. And they, I'll usually send them back to an article. They can just read about it, and I show them how to program it. Because that is the stuff that's not sexy. But if you can explain the why behind it, it's going to make more sense to your clients. And then they can start seeing the connections when they start getting better results. So I think at the end of the day, you should know why everything is in your program. If you don't know why, then there's a problem. There's a disconnect. And I think that if you don't know why, then it probably hasn't earned the right to be in your program. So know why you are doing what you're doing and have a system for that. And don't fly by the seat of your pants and just take something off of social media. Everyone is different. Everyone needs some level of customization. So figure out what that system is for you. And it doesn't have to be my system or your system. It could be your own system. Make it your own. Of course, like, one of the things that I help coaches with is figuring out what that system is for them. And there are certain things that we can live by. We can live by the fact that high intensity workouts take a minimum of 72 hours to recover from. So you should follow that rule, number one. The second rule is that, again, going back to Louie, a pyramid's only as big as its base. So build a base through loaded carries, through sled drags, through, some kettlebell work, some things that are kind of just, not going to break the bank, so to speak. You can recover from, but you can also build strength and build conditioning simultaneously. And then, figure out where it is that someone's deficient. If you have someone that's got terrible recovery and their resting heart rate's through the roof, sometimes the best course of action is addition by subtraction. You don't give them more high intensity training, you give them less. It sounds like rocket science, but I think a lot of trainers just want to impress their clients of how much they can smoke them. And you know what? At the end of the day, anyone can be smoked. I can make you do 1,000 burpees. You're going to be hurting if you do 1,000 burpees. But does that really make me a great trainer? And no, it doesn't. So know why you're doing what you're doing, and know how to build people up through low intensity measures, and the rest falls into place. I don't know if that answers the strength and conditioning question. I think that kind of
Beautifully
wraps everything together.
You mean we don't need to have our clients with a sled strap behind them while they're doing farmers carries? We don't need to do stuff like that, or flipping a tire in front of them while they're dragging a sled? That's a no.
Probably not. And I will say, sled pull, farmer carry, like that combination style method, I do like those for the right people. But there are a lot of other things. I see, people doing Olympic lifting. At the end of the day, Olympic lifting is great if you're an Olympic lifter. And that's one of the beefs I have with CrossFit is like, they say it's functional. Well, I don't know how many times I'm doing a snatch in everyday life. I mean, yeah, you say, oh, you're going to put something in the cabinet. I don't need a snatch to do that. I can do a one arm overhead press. I can do a goblet squat or a landmine thruster, which is a global movement pattern. So if we want to get down to the biomechanics of it, there are plenty of movements that are safer and that yield a higher return on investment. So just think about whether or not what you're prescribing aligns with the client's goals and needs. Olympic lifting, for 9 out of 10 people really doesn't. And I would even argue, even for someone who wants to train explosive strength, there are other ways that are better, in my opinion. And again, that's its a whole other topic, but what you're prescribing to the client should be the right fit for them.
And I try to be very careful about my own biases because I don't have a background in Olympic lifting. And I'm inclined to agree with you. I like highlighting the good Olympic lifting coaches that I know. If someone's looking for it here, I have some people I can refer you to. They're great at it. My friend Hannah Gray, for example, here in Edmonton is wonderful. But, if I'm going to do explosive work with someone, let's say I've got some young athletes to work with, they're probably doing trap bar jumps. They're probably throwing medicine balls, that sort of stuff.
Right.
And that stuff will do, most, if not the same sort of thing. And it also depends on the person in front of you. If I've got young athletes who are really interested or experienced in Olympic lifting, they're going to work with someone else who knows Olympic lifting. If I've got a recreational adult athlete who doesn't possess the overhead mobility to go into Olympic lifting, especially in a ballistic motion, then I'm not going to turn around and say, hey, you need to do Olympic lifts. Let's do some stuff that works for you. So let's go back to the thing I said about you being 17 years in the industry and that balance of having come up the way you did, following the people we've talked about, building the fundamentals of it, and training in person, head down, training clients for a decade. I had a similar experience. I started this podcast when I think it was 7.5 years into my career. I didn't even mess around with Instagram until probably after year 9, right? Mm-hmm. And how do you balance that with the potential that we have with online media, social media, and keep yourself from becoming that gatekeeper to say, well, you have to do it the way that I did it?
Yeah, the way I did it was definitely, I think having things happen organically is the right way. It's kind of just what's meant to be with, it's really your destiny. And for me, I always loved programming. I loved coaching people, and I coached people for a long time. I owned a gym. I coached a lot of people at the gym, was training people one-on-one and in a group setting. And, I just happened to have the opportunity to work with other gyms all over the world and affect more people. At one point in time, we had about 50,000 people a day doing our programming. So writing programming for CrossFit gyms all over the world, I had over 200 gyms at its high point, do the average around, 75 to 100 members per gym. There's a lot of people using my programming. So for me, it was just more fulfilling to say, well, I can affect more change. I can, teach more people how to train smarter. And basically, I started writing articles because I always wanted to write articles for teenage. I never thought I would be smart enough to write articles for teenage. And I think we all probably have that same thing. Yep. But I'm like, man, I would, reading those articles all those years, I just felt compelled to want to pay it forward and do the same thing that was done for me. But I started writing articles more so because I had a lot of questions about my programming when I started working with other gyms. So, someone would ask, a lot of people in the CrossFit space, they don't have their education is very limited. CrossFit's education is great for CrossFit, but it doesn't go a whole lot outside of that. So people would ask, well, like, why are we doing all this accessory work, or why are we doing farmer carries or sled pulls? So naturally, I just wrote instead of just answering that question multiple times over, I would just write an article. And anytime someone asked that question, I just refer the article to them. Go ahead.
I was going to say, everybody grab onto that. And this is what I tell people all the time. If you are getting these kinds of questions from your clientele and you have a website, get a website done seriously. If you're interested in getting into article writing, it seems very daunting, right? And you and I both are like, can't even believe that we're ready for teenage. That's crazy to imagine. I never thought I could be that person. But you can start by taking the questions that people are asking you. You write an article or a blog or a very elaborate FAQ for your website. All of a sudden you have an article. There it is. Boom. Don't worry about it being polished and perfect and edited. If you want to learn the skill of writing, I've got some great books for you. Message me. I'll tell you what books to read, but it gets you started. And then that's a resource that you can now turn around and send to clients or people on your social media and go, hey, I have an article on that. There's a really cool feeling when someone asks me something like, hey, I wrote an article for T Nation on that. Here you go, right in the DMs. And people love it. So anyway, go back to what you were saying.
I think that's a fantastic point. And again, that's kind of like what happened as far as like building my online business. And at the time I was only working with CrossFit gyms, but I was also working with their coaches too. So there was a lot of people I was trying to like sell on my style of training, because my style of training was very different than the CrossFit style. We didn't do any random workouts. We did a lot of landmine. We did a lot of sled, loaded carries. It was very structured. We didn't do high intensity workouts every day. And that's, I think, one thing that I had a lot of success with is their clients started, just having insane results. I mean, they were hitting 100-pound PRs on their lists, which I say now, and I still can't believe it, but people were hitting 100-pound PRs on their list because, again, you train the wrong way for so long, you start training the right way, and you got a little bit of a base there, and you know how to move with the foundational patterns. A lot of great things can happen. So just the word of mouth of that spread. And then people would want to come on and sign up with my business because of the results they were hearing from other gym owners. So the content piece was really an integral part of that, because without that, I don't think the business would have done as well as it did. And it also established me as an expert in that field. So naturally I started I think the first 3 or 4 articles I sent T Nation, they didn't want because they were too much about CrossFit. But one of my best articles for T Nation is called CrossFit for Meatheads. And that article did really, really well. But, one of the things that helped was sending articles to T Nation. And then I sent articles to Elite FTS. And eventually they offered me like a spot as a columnist and, writing a monthly column for them, which is pretty cool. And, I wrote articles for John Russon's website, and all that stuff helped. So I think that, you guys that are out there listening, we're in a very saturated space. And if you've seen any of the statistics, online training is going to grow exponentially in the next 5 years. It's predicted to go, I think, from 5 billion to 65 billion. It's at 5 billion currently. Just wrap that on for size, to $65 billion in 5 years' time. That's what it's projected at. So if you want to establish yourself, writing content is huge. And it doesn't need to be a 4,500 word article. Write a 500 word article about why you would program farmer carries, or why your clients should be doing recovery work or going for a walk, whatever the case may be. Write a 500 word article about it. Doesn't have to be complex. I'm actually finding, I think you might agree with me, that now it's changed so much. Like back in the day, I used to write 3,000-4,000 word articles and they would do really well. Now the short and sweet stuff, even like the podcast I do now, we do 20-minute or less episodes. So it's very short. And even the stuff that does well on social media now is like very, very short clips. So keep it short, keep it simple. And it's an easy way to build your credibility. If you have someone that's thinking of working with you, why should they work with you? So that person can work with anyone. Why should they work with you? Show them that you're credible, that you know your stuff, and that you don't have to plaster before and afters on your social media. That's one thing I just can't stand. Give people free value. Free value. Give them something that they can take action on, and you will gain clients. It might not happen right away. It might take some time, but just provide value in your post. The before and afters once in a while are okay, but don't do that daily. Just post value, post something that they can take action on, and you will see that that's going to help build your business.
Ooh, you're speaking my language with this stuff. And you hit on a lot of the stuff that I've done a few presentations on. I've got a few more this year in brand building. And as you mentioned, the industry can really feel saturated. If you accumulate things that give you credibility, when I read through what you've done in your career, writing for websites like T Nation and Elite FTS, that gives you great authority and credibility in our space. People pay attention to it. The fact that you have a master's in exercise science is a piece of authority. It's not that, like we talk about, not everybody has to go and chase that, but if it fits your ultimate goals and the education you need, then sure. The fact that you were a successful gym owner, the fact that you run a successful mentorship, these things are, and having a book, like that's huge. That's big, big, big. And I just did something for my friend Dean Guido, who's my former podcast co-host, and Jeb Johnston. They're part of compound performances mentorship now. And I just did an internal presentation, and it goes through all of these different things, and everybody that we look up to, that we've learned from, that everyone listening who you consider industry leaders and educators, they have these big pieces of credibility and authority they built in their careers. So if let's say you're listening and you have a small gym, a studio space, make sure that's really forefront in your media. If you have, God, if you've written a book, make sure people know about that stuff, right? Like we've got Mike Boyle writing books, but we also got, lesser known figures in the industry. My buddy Jason Leonards, who's a podcast host and a bunch of other things and owns a small facility, but he's got a book. He's got a page-a-day book that he took from quotes from his podcast, right? I'm in there. I got 3 pages in there. Cool. So look at the things that you love doing and you could build around. And I think one of the best places to start, like you said, is writing articles. A podcast is credible. If you're really good at YouTube, absolutely. But do more than social media. And I know there are examples of people who are blowing up on TikTok and they're doing okay with that. But I think there needs to be more credibility in the long run for a successful career. And I've been sort of laughing at this. And like, if anybody's doing this, I apologize. But if your greatest accomplishment in your career in your Instagram bio is your TikTok following, then go get more, go build more. Because that doesn't scream credibility to me when I'm looking around for people who, hey, I want to have that person on my podcast. Hey, I want to endorse that person's stuff. I want to recommend that person's programs to the people listening. So let's tell everybody about the programs you have that are there to help coaches.
Yeah, so that's a great point. I think that, I'm in this game. I know you're in this game to build relationships. I've had some of the same clients now for 7 years. And that's online. So online is obviously trickier. I don't see them in person, but I built some incredible relationship. I've got a group of guys I've been working with this year. We've got 43 guys in the group. They're all 35 plus. Most of them are dads. Some are actually granddads. We've got a couple of older guys in there that are doing great. But it is a brotherhood. That is the stuff that I want. I want a brotherhood. I want like-minded people that are supporting each other. There's just nothing better than that. That's why you're a trainer. You didn't choose to be a trainer for any other reason other than the fact you want to help people, and you can help them by giving them free content. I wrote over 1,000 articles in the last 7 years. And you know what? I didn't get paid a whole lot. Really nothing. You can't make a career on writing articles, at least and from my point of view. But a lot of free stuff. You got to do a lot of free stuff, and just be okay with it because it's going to help you. Since doing gym programming, I shifted, and this is one of the things that, and I'm sure you're probably better off because you have your business background, but I didn't have a business background. So I think one of the other things you can do is diversify your knowledge. I learned everything there was to know about strength and conditioning, but I can tell you what, I bet you know a fuck of a lot more about business than I do, because that was always the thing for me that was a limiting factor, understanding, just how to institute SOPs and how to manage employees. So diversify your knowledge, because this game is going online. Now you can have a hybrid and do both maybe, but you're going to have to learn how to run a business at some point or another. And if you're just a strength and conditioning guru like me, you're going to be, luckily I've got my wife who helps me, because if she didn't, then I don't even know. It would be tough because there's just so many things behind the scenes, as you know. So needless to say, as far as writing programs go, the main mission for myself is helping people through training. So I write training programs for individuals. We use the Conjugate system. I teach people how to write programs through my programming playbook, which is basically the holy grail of everything I've learned in my life about how to take action. Literally, and I hate to sound like a sales pitch, but you can open that thing up and take action in 20 minutes and write better programs. There's no going through a million different modules. There's a lot of modules, but they're, quick, digestible. You're not going to have to read a textbook. You can see what's in there, use the templates, use the sample programming, see how it's done, and start taking action literally tonight. So that's what I want, because I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of confusion. If you read a textbook and you get stuck in like muscle physiology, you're going to learn a lot of good stuff, but you're not going to know how to apply it in an actual practical setting. So being able to take action, to write great training programs so you can have clients for the next 7 years. You're not constantly chasing new clients and, trying to the DM game, like DM me if you want to work with me. It's a tough one, you know. You're in a pool of a lot of people that are doing the same thing, and you know, it's a numbers game. If you got 500,000 followers and you do the DM thing, you're probably going to get a lot of people DM you. But I think a better, you know, a more practical solution for most people that don't have a huge following is just to say, provide value, stick to the people that know you and trust you, and continue to improve your craft. Because if you're working with someone and they're getting great results, they're looking the best, they're feeling the best, why would they go elsewhere? They wouldn't. So I think at the end of the day, it's about building your business by being just an absolute master of writing great programs. And then, you know, the interpersonal stuff, I can't teach you that, but you've got to get good at it. You got to be able to communicate with people. You've got to learn to connect with the people. There are, I mean, you could probably recommend a lot of resources on that. The thing that I'm getting at here is like, don't be, what do they call it? A one-trick pony. Don't be a one-trick pony. Learn business, learn how to write programs. If you feel weak in one area, go down the rabbit hole a little bit and improve that area. For me, it was conditioning back in the day. And guess what? Conditioning now is one of my strongest areas. So make that area of weakness a strength, and the rest will fall into place. And just, you know, be a good person at the end of the day, because no one wants to work with a dick.
Well, you just described applying the Conjugate method to your career as a fitness professional, which I might turn into the title. I like that. There's a couple of things that I'll sort of add to that discussion I think is valuable to look at. I like reading books, and I binge books, but I like reading books on almost like mental models about decision making and philosophy, your attitude about how you're going to approach a lot of different things, as opposed to reading. And you get people who are like, oh, you should only read a few books and you need to absorb and learn everything in them and blah, blah. It's like, I don't really subscribe to that, because I think the more ideas you expose yourself to, first of all, you can go back and really do deep dives into stuff. You're like, okay, this is fucking great. But I like things like Ryan Holiday's books on philosophy, and the Almanac
Stoic. I mean, that's a staple.
That's a
great book.
Stuff.
Yeah,
great stuff. And it's like daily reminders, literally. And I like the idea of having something kind of in your brain at all times, as opposed to just like, okay, I read this one book and then I don't go back to it for 4 years. And then the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, really good book, because it's a lot of the business and the life philosophies of a really successful venture capitalist turned philosopher. This sort of stuff is going to help you with how you approach different aspects of your career. And then on top of the philosophy and mental model side of stuff, it's going to still be behavioral change, because that stuff's at the root of success with the client in front of you and communication. So I like books like Motivational Interviewing in Fitness and Nutrition, a book like The Coaching Habit, Michael Bungay Stainer. That stuff's going to be really valuable. But I think, like you said, we've got to nail down the fundamentals. If we get really, really good at programming, and that's why I think people should be diving into your resources. So tell people where they can find this stuff, your website and your social media.
So I have a free download they can check out. It's on my website, jasonbrowncoaching.com, and they can opt into that for free. And it's like basically my 5-step guide of how to write better training programs. And it's very simple. Being in this for a long time, the longer and longer I do this, the thing I find that is the most, I would say, attractive to me is simplicity with both programming and teaching other coaches. And there are just so many things that are overcomplicated right now. And I think that programming is one of those things that we can keep very simple. And if you have a system, it's going to be a lot easier to not only write better programs, but to make sure that you're putting your clients in the best possible position. There are so many other things. I think that we could, you know, I just realized as you were talking that someone hearing this might think like, well, shit, what do I need to learn? Do I need to do programming? Do I need to learn about this? Do I need to learn about that? I think that, and I want your opinion on this too. I think that if I was like, what is the low hanging fruit right now? I think the first thing is to figure out who you love working with. You know, don't worry about your knowledge at this very moment right here. If you're sitting here listening to this, figure out who it is you want to work with. And then everything goes towards that. So if, you know, for instance, for me, I love working with 35 plus guys. So everything I do kind of goes towards that in terms of, you know, I'm not talking about doing crazy workouts. I'm talking about the guy that, has been in the trenches, maybe like an old school meathead, but still wants to hit some PRs, but he has to have training support his life outside of the gym. So those are the kind of things that I'm thinking about. I'm not thinking about like how to help someone get better at like CrossFit or maybe Olympic lifting. It is more directed towards that. So I think that if you can figure out who your ideal client is, just really more from the business perspective, that will help you create your content, your social media. And if you create articles, so remember that when you create an article, that's an easy place like for a call to action. Like, hey, here's my top 5 loaded carry variations and read the full article on my website. That is a great way to get you the right clients. And of course, I think that you should be understanding how to write a great program. But I do think that if you can nail down these things early on, if you plan to go online 100%, nail this stuff down now so it doesn't become an issue. Because I will tell you from personal experience, it was a very hard transition going from working with just CrossFit gyms then to individuals. And I started off working with individuals. I had no plan to work with CrossFit gyms. It just happened. But needless to say, like, I've changed my name of my business. I mean, you probably know I was box programming. I was BP training system. I'm Jason Brown coaching. It's really tricky. And I hate to see other people make those same mistakes that I made where you're, essentially you're trying to figure out who you are, and then reverse engineer.
We'll leave out this one point, and I like where you ended up with Jason Brown coaching. We have all these people out there with relatively generic names, and some of you listening are probably going to go, "Oh yeah, my Instagram handle, my business is a fairly generic name," and I think that's okay if you're precision nutrition. Renaissance periodization is my other example. Mm-hmm. Think about it this: do we know who Renaissance periodization and precision nutrition are, juggernaut training systems, because they've got great names? Or do we know who they are because they have really successful business models with some really smart people behind them after years and years of their work to establish brand and media and articles and books and what have you? Now, precision nutrition has meaning to us because of everything that brand has done underneath that name. That name didn't create the brand. The brand and all its work validated the name. So I believe that, especially when we're individual coaches, the brand strength is around our own name, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of the names we've talked about, someone like Tony Gentlecore, even his physical facility is called Core. Cool. It's a play on his name, right? Eric Cressy and Cressy Sports Performance, P2P all the time. They lament having called it Cressy, but in a lot of ways, we also know that the strength of it is branded around Eric Cressy's name because he was writing a lot of big articles for T-Nation in the early days, and he'd grown a big brand. So I really think that the individual coach, skip the generic name. Your media really should. It's like if I have someone on Instagram and they don't have their name in their handle or their bio, it's like, fuck, I can't remember this person's name. Whereas like the name stands out to me. So there's a lot of value in that. So we'll leave everybody with that one. Your Instagram, it's just
Jason Brown coaching. Yeah. So easy to find. I mean, yeah, there's tons of resources on my site. I mean, you've got an article. I mean, everything I've talked about, aerobic training, Conjugate. I've got multiple articles about Conjugate. I've got a ton of articles on T-Nation, tons of articles on Elite FTS. And yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of free stuff that you can potentially educate yourself on. Everything I've talked about, there's everything you could want for free there for you. So you don't have to spend $1 with me. I'm not on this podcast to sell anything. If you get in, a lot of times people get into, using, one of my training programs, which are, all under $100. Use a training program, you get the best results you like. That's why I usually have coaches come to me. They use a training program, they get the better results than they've ever gotten. They want to know why they did. So that kind of, leads them down that path. And again, that's how it worked for me too, which is kind of ironic that Conjugate led me down this path and to look into these various areas. So there's plenty of stuff there for free. I have got free programs all over the internet, all on my site. So check that stuff out, absorb it, and take it for what it is.
There's a lot of resources and information that you've put out over the years. So the reason why I bring people on here, and the reason why I wanted to have you on for a long time, is because you've been doing a really great job with this stuff. So for everybody listening, for those of you who already know Jason, amazing. Those of you who haven't done too much of a dive, start with the social media, dig around the website, look for some stuff that interests you, see where the rabbit hole takes you, but go follow Jason. I really appreciate having you on. For everybody listening, thank you again. Appreciate your patronage and the fact that you're here with me. So I just had Brett Bartholomew on last week. Chris Duffin was recent. These are some really smart people. Tom Morrison, go check out their stuff. I got Natalia Mello Wilson next. She's a former Miss Olympia bikini winner who's a really cool coach in our space. So I'm looking forward to chatting with her. And I'm going to pull her into T Nation. We're going to do an article together, and hopefully it works out the way I've got it planned. It'll be really cool, actually. People will like this thing. And if anybody's finding me through Jason's media, hey, just check out some of the other guests that we've had on recently. If you're really into the strength and conditioning stuff, scroll back a little bit. Joel Jameson's been on, and Martin Rooney, Luca Hosavar, you name it. A lot of good people. So thanks for tuning in. I appreciate everybody. Jason, thanks for taking the time to talk today.
Awesome, brother. Appreciate you having me.